Yeah. And if you want to get to it afterwards, it will be available in NACA's member resource area. Please use the chat throughout the session to share any questions or comments. We love hearing from you, and we will try to leave time at the end for Q&A. But if you do have a question that we don't get to, we will share our contact emails, and you can catch up with us afterwards. So speaking of the Q&A function, we are going to familiarize ourselves with that right now. So let's do a little icebreaker. If you could pick one animal to be your sidekick for one day on the job, what animal in the entirety of the animal kingdom, what would it be? Go ahead and put that in the chat. You could have one animal riding shotgun with you or hanging out at the shelter with you. You know, I said raccoon too, just because of the absolute unhinged energy and constant snacks. Red panda. Oh, I love red pandas. Chimpanzee need the extra hands. Honey badger. No one would mess with you with the honey badger. I love it. Yep. A pity. Yep. Adorable and useful. Oh, kittens. It would definitely help de-escalate any situation. Here, just hold the kitten. You'll be fine.
Good negotiation tactic.
Right. Can't be mad when you've got a kitten in your hands. Well, we are so excited to bring you the Leading Conversation series again this year, and we think it's a great way to connect you with some industry leaders. Each month, we explore tools, data, and real-life strategies to help guide your work. Whether you're in the shelter or out in the field, we hope you walk away with something new to think about and something practical you can use on a day-to-day basis. So with that, I am going to turn it over to the amazing Juliana Tetlow from San Diego Humane.
Thank you so much. All right, now we're going to do the Am I Sharing the Right Screen game. So let's see if we can get this presentation up. And if you can give me some sort of indication that you're seeing the right thing.
Thumbs up from me. Everybody else good? Can you see it?
Beautiful.
Excellent.
Okay. All right. Now let's see if it'll advance. There we are. As Dana mentioned, I am Juliana Tetlow, and I'm actually, after the introduction, going to go off camera so I'm not distracting myself. I am the Senior Director of Government Relations for San Diego Humane Society. I've been with the organization for 7 years. I also have a consulting practice called Civic Alliance Solutions, and through that, I assist with contract procurement, negotiation, and management for animal welfare entities. Prior to having my practice and working for San Diego Humane, I worked in the state legislature for 10 years. I worked in local government and the private sector for another 5. Right before going in with San Diego Humane, I was a contract lobbyist representing a variety of clients, including Airbnb, Clear Channel, iHeartMedia, San Diego International Airport, and a number of other trade associations and developers. So a lot of time in the government relations space. Okay, hang on one second. Sorry. Here we go. At San Diego Humane Society, we are the animal control and animal care organization for 13 municipalities in San Diego County, with the largest being the city of San Diego. Over my time, I have assisted organizations through contract negotiations and procurement in San Diego and beyond for contracts as small as $20,000 annually to as large as $250 million 10-year contract with the city of San Diego. Oh heavens. There we go. No better time than on a webinar with people, 100 people, to practice new technology. So I've never done this before, but if you can take out your phones, I kind of want it to be a little bit interactive. I'd like to know who's with us today. If you scan that QR code or copy and paste that link into your browser, you should be able to answer the question on the screen. about the type of organization you represent. Ooh, nice. It appears to be working. Fabulous. All right, looks like, oh, we've got a lot of nonprofits. Excellent. Well, don't worry, my government and municipal friends. We won't leave you out um, of this presentation. All right. I'll come back to this later just to see at the end how many fully we have. Moving right along. Today, we are going to talk about negotiating and contracting, and the concepts still apply if you are a department within a municipality, because fighting for limited dollars within a government structure can be just as hard of a negotiation as private contractors face. I'll cover common contracting pitfalls and challenges and ways to avoid or inoculate against them as best as possible. And we will also go over building sustainable partnerships and tips to contract with confidence. Before we do that, we're going to do one more pop quiz. All right. Of the, so the following question is, what are the most common pitfalls when negotiating a contract? Failure to thoroughly prepare, over-reliance on verbal assurances instead of written terms, ignoring term exit renewal or dispute resolution clauses, or not knowing your or their best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And then sneaking right there at the bottom is all of the above. Let's see if I can. All right. Whoopsie. So the answer is all of the above. All of these are pitfalls that can be commonly that folks commonly fall into as they are negotiating contracts. All right, we're going to go into a couple of these in more detail. So pitfall number one is the failure to thoroughly prepare. In more detail, even if you have a clear idea about what you want from a negotiation, you still need to prepare and rehearse your arguments carefully. When you prepare, you feel more confident, which is important in any negotiation. If you can demonstrate your knowledge of the subject in question, the other party will take you seriously. And to be clear, this doesn't just mean being an expert in animal welfare. It means having someone on your team that has intimate knowledge of the structure and standing of the agency you are considering a contract with. You need to know your audience at all levels through the process. Discussions typically start with staff representatives of the municipality to discuss needs, scope of work, and expectations. Many of these things will likely have already been touched on if the contract discussions are in response to an RFP, but a clear understanding on both sides of the goals and deliverables is critical. Once you have the operating portion of the contract set, you'll move into cost and compensation and general terms and conditions. After attorneys on both sides get their attorney on, the contract will likely go before a local governing body for a vote. Getting to know the staff and negotiators on the other side of the table, as well as knowing and having prior relationship with the elected officials who will eventually vote to approve or deny your agreement, is pretty critical. And it's incredibly important to include everything in your contracting discussion at the beginning, as it's extremely difficult to get new concepts accepted after the negotiation period has taken place. You need to bring your experts, and note that this doesn't necessarily mean just members of your executive team. Have experts in operations who are intimately in touch with the day-to-day functions to advise you. If your primary cost driver is personnel, which many are, have someone from your HR department who can speak to compounding factors like minimum or prevailing wage requirements. If you know someone who has intimate knowledge of the agency or the people you are negotiating with, or the members who will make the final vote, and they are willing to assist, this could be board members, consultants, and lobbyists, engage them. And this piece is really important. If you're entering into group negotiations, sit down with your team beforehand and decide who is going to say what. Practice your pitch and clarify your arguments. Discuss what the other side is likely to say and what you're prepared to compromise on. Make notes and bring them to your meeting. Trying to secure the best deal for yourself, your team, or your organization can be daunting. You may be scared of saying the wrong thing or settling too early or haggling in general. And maybe you find rejecting other people's proposals embarrassing or stressful, especially if your leadership style is more consensual than directive. You can address these feelings by remembering that there is a difference between negotiating and arguing. Unlike an argument where each party makes the case for or against something, the aim of a negotiation is for both sides to reach an agreement. As both parties want the same and different things. So the same thing would ultimately be to come to an agreement on a contract, and the different thing is primarily more or less money for the services. You can only arrive at this point through discussion of what you are and are not prepared to do, and it is just part of the process. Pitfall number 2, every word matters in more detail. Contracts are like law in miniature. Once executed, a contract functions like a private statute. The parties live or die by the text. Courts will enforce the written language, even if it later proves inconvenient. So precision from the outset is non-negotiable. Small word shift equals big dollar shifts. Consider the difference between shall versus may. One mandates performance, the other merely permits it. Consider as well best efforts versus reasonable efforts. Courts treat these standards differently. The former can impose a far heavier burden. Indemnify, defend, and hold harmless are 3 distinct obligations, and any additional words can multiply exposure. To really drive this point home, I will use the often repeated phrase when discussing this subject in particular: commas decide cases. There was a $5 million O'Connor versus Oakhurst dairy settlement in 2018 that literally hinged on a missing Oxford comma in Maine's overtime statute. Up in Canada, a misplaced comma in a Rogers communication utility pole contract cost the company $2.3 million in 2006. Put plainly, punctuation equals money. Integration and order of precedent language prevents side deals. A short sentence declaring the agreement fully integrated blocks later claims that verbal promises or outside agreements modify a deal. If you want to be able to modify the deal at a later time, verbally or in writing, make sure that's clearly noted as well. Without an order of precedence clause, conflicting documents like scope of work, general terms and conditions, and others create interpretation and litigation landmines. And particularly in animal welfare, definitions drive interpretation. A single definition section silently controls dozens of obligations. Narrowly defining confidential information, for example, can free one party to reuse valuable know-how. Particularly in animal welfare, undefined industry terms invite conflicts at a later date. And importantly, boilerplate is not boilerplate, especially as it relates to general terms and conditions, or for short T&Cs, in animal welfare. Government entities almost always have standard T&Cs that they impose on every contractor. But as an animal welfare professional, you have to read these carefully and insist on changes to terms that could or would be violated by the nature of the work we do. For example, things like prohibitions on outsourcing, which is critical to our ability to utilize emergency vets for off-site hours, urgent care for animals in distress, or hiring an outside company for janitorial services. Look for clauses that address hazardous waste and make sure the language doesn't create a conflict with the nature of work we do, including medical waste disposal and even disposal of animal waste, if you think about like water runoff from cleaning. Termination clauses are also something to pay particular attention to in general T&Cs. They traditionally heavily favor government entities' ability to terminate the agreement and are silent on the ability for the contractee to terminate the agreement. So you must insist on equity and mutuality in those clauses to ensure that your option to terminate is also clearly noted. Drafting discipline ultimately reduces negotiation friction. Clear and consistent wording minimizes back and forth and avoids interpretation anxiety. Internally, it gives our departments like finance, operation, and leadership teams confidence that obligations are unambiguous and measurable. I think the biggest key here is also to take your time. The cost of fixing a contract is so much greater than the cost of drafting a contract right. Post-execution amendments consume time, potential legal fees, and goodwill, and may require additional board or regulator approvals. Animal welfare naturally draws passionate and compassionate leaders who care deeply about the animals entrusted to their care, and this at times works against you. I'm not suggesting that we go in planning to fail, of course, but you do need to know when to step away, particularly when in a situation of renegotiating an existing contract that needs to be more financially favorable to your organization. It can be very difficult not to make decisions based on investments you've already made in the community or in service of an existing contract, but it will never get better if you aren't willing to walk away. We're going to talk a little bit more about budget later, but taking on exponentially more work and bearing exponentially more cost than a contract pays is very difficult to work your way out of once the agreement to be underpaid has taken place. I've worked with contracts that cost millions more to fulfill than the municipalities pay, and we've had to work really hard to close those gaps. It's exceedingly tough to play that type of hardball, especially when the question of your leadership and your board of directors may be, what about the animals? But allowing the work of your organization to be chronically underfunded doesn't serve the animals or their people in the long run. Of course, you need to care about the outcome of the negotiations, but not so much that you make bad decisions because you feel unable to walk away. In other words, try and keep your emotions in check and decide when to call it a day. If you can turn your back on negotiation, you'll be in a stronger bargaining position should the other party decide to try again. And that will be because the onus will be on them to improve their offer. And please note that while I'm not advising you walk away, but if you don't consider that even as an option and you don't socialize your board to that option or other decision makers, you may be inclined to cave into the other side's demands simply to make a deal. If you are not desperate, if you recognize that you have other options, the other negotiator will sense that strength in your position. Pitfall number 3, lack of clarity around your best alternative to a negotiated agreement. So this really kind of falls in with the previous pitfall, which I spoke to but didn't really define, of knowing when to walk away. Essentially, even though your aim in negotiation is to get what you want or need, you must decide to the extent that you can what the next best alternative is. And that means knowing when it's best to cut your losses to protect the financial stability of your organization. Decide on your best alternative before you enter negotiations and know what a good outcome is, even if it's not exactly what you want. Make sure that you have plenty of alternatives to choose from. In other words, never negotiate without options. If you depend too much on one outcome of a negotiation, you will lose your ability to say no. When you say to yourself, I will walk if I can't conclude a deal that is satisfactory, the other side can tell that you mean it. Your resolve will force them to make concessions, and having a clear best alternative means you can push harder during negotiations and potentially get a better deal than you expected because you've kept your options open. And do your homework. Gather as much pertinent information to your negotiation as you can. What are their needs? What pressures do they feel? And what other options do they have? And this is vital to successful negotiation. You can't make accurate decisions without understanding the other side's situation. The more information that you have about the people with whom you are negotiating, as well as their situation, the stronger you will be. All right, pull out your phones. Pop quiz. Of these options, summarizing mutual gains already agreed upon, switching negotiators mid-discussion without notice, offering a creative package deal or trade-offs, or pausing to consult subject matters, what do you think is the least effective negotiation tactic? All right. It may have been obvious based on these responses, but you all are very smart and very correct. The least effective negotiation tactic is to switch negotiators without notice. It immediately erodes trust and can have a devastating impact on whatever progress you've made up to that point. You can switch it up, but make sure that the other side has been given notice and that proper introductions are made prior to that point. Okay. Common contract challenges. This is one of my favorite topics. And I just want to note that while um, the other concepts were sort of broad and applicable to negotiating and contracting overall, these ones are more specific to animal welfare discussions. So we'll start with budget. This is probably the most obvious. Animal care and control departments, agencies, and nonprofits providing services are chronically underfunded. It is incredible to me how consistently and deeply surprised government agency staff, city town managers, law enforcement agencies, and others are to learn how much it costs to run an open admissions, high live outcome shelter or effective animal control program. And this makes compensation the most challenging part of any contract discussion, especially if the subject of animal care or animal control is new to the person or people that you are in discussion with. And I will say that one of the most common, but to me, bizarre and wildly unfair budgeting method I see for contracting is compensation based on intake or any other singular variable metric for that matter, if a base rate isn't part of the equation. And I see it often. Um, while costs can fluctuate a bit with intake, certainly, there are fixed costs associated with sheltering and animal control, especially in personnel and facility costs, that don't go up or down if intake dips or increases. Further, shelters should not be penalized for successfully reducing intake through programming or other services to the community that result in pets being able to stay with their people. Animal care and control agencies and organizations should be compensated for the totality of the work they perform, not just based on the number of animals that do or don't come through their door. So when you're looking at costs and proposed compensation, look at your overall costs and use a number of metrics to determine the appropriate conversation. So this can include intake, of course, but it should also include other indicators of service usage, like calls for service to animal control or humane law enforcement, licenses issued, some sort of indicator for medical service usage. You can look at spay neuters or vaccinations as a metric and calculate from there. I recommend using rolling averages of those metrics from the 3 to 5 prior years to ensure you're counting for seasonal and population related variations. And I also highly recommend fixed price contracts rather than variable. This gives certainty to your organization as well as predictability for the entity that you're contracting with. Also, be sure you have a clause that covers compensation for unexpected events like mass intake related to hoarding or natural or man-made disasters. These events exponentially increase organizational costs, and there needs to be a clear pathway for reimbursement over the agreed upon annual compensation amount. The next common contract challenge is the baseline. If you are a nonprofit who are providing government services, be willing to know and acknowledge the difference between service levels that a city may provide to their residents based on the local laws and mandates for animal care and control, and the level of services your organization, whose primary mission is in service to animals, will provide. Be fair in thinking about what your organization does that is more mission-based than mandate-based, such as extraordinary medical care or education and community programming, and be prepared to show that value-added service that you would fundraise for and provide to the community even without that contract. It helps to further solidify the cost that you do propose as it relates to the mandated services you're providing. And finally, for these challenges, blind spots. While it is impossible, of course, to know what you don't know, going into any discussion regarding contracts or ultimately negotiating a contract with acknowledgement to yourself that you don't know it all and really listening to understand and learn will help you avoid missing opportunities based on blind spots. You'd be truly surprised what I've heard in preliminary contract discussions, or as I like to call them, negotiation light sessions, that allowed us to change our approach and really home in on the things that have, I mean, really initially seemed inconsequential, but turned out to be like just what we needed to kind of sweeten the pot. Now we will talk about building sustainable partnerships. There's actually one thing I wanted to note. There was one on the previous slide and there's one on this slide, and we can certainly send these out after the fact, but I do have some recommended materials. The prior was a recommended reading. This is a recommended listen here in that yellow bar. Just some resources to utilize if you want to deepen your knowledge about negotiating and being successful in this space. Okay, building sustainable partnerships. Trust, respect, communication. Building sustainable partnerships and relationships with decision makers in your community should be a priority, regardless of whether you've held a contract for years or intend to pursue a contract in the future or have no desire to contract at all. Approach these relationships in much the same way you cultivate your friendships, by being friendly and personally helpful, by being useful and trustworthy, and a source of sound information and insight, and contributing your personal time to professional and political needs and interests. It's so critical that we as animal welfare professionals continuously educate policymakers and staff about the incredible work we do. It both sets us up for success in big endeavors like contracting or enacting legislation, and inoculates us against activist activity or helps with the establishment of trust in the unfortunate event that something does go wrong. Invite these folks for tours, comp them to your major events, and assign a liaison or contact person who is solely responsible for the relationship between elected and city officials and your organization. Engage your board in these efforts as well. Personal letters, personal visits, phone calls, emails, and other forms of communication are really important when they come from constituents who are well known, highly regarded, and have gone out of their way to be helpful in a variety of ways in the past. Strong personal relationships are the best means of influencing decision making. And building relationships does take time and careful effort, but it is the most effective way to shape the thinking of those who you will ultimately need at some point. You want to become a trusted resource on your issues and know theirs as well. An important way to cultivate relationships with key officials is to become educated on their priorities too, not just yours. Contract with confidence. It is so important to know your worth, aim high, and expect the best outcome. Successful negotiators are optimists. If you expect more, you will get more. People who aim high do better. Your optimism will become a self-fulfilling prophecy. Conversely, if you have low expectations, you will probably wind up with a less than satisfying outcome. As much as everyone tries to remain objective and not take things personally, emotions often come into play during a negotiation. Emotional intelligence allows you to channel your emotions productively while giving you insight on how the other party feels. And I cannot stress this enough. Spend time on personal development to better understand your leadership style, your negotiation style, and more. Cultivating this awareness helps you understand yourself, your reactions, and the implications of what they say and you say, not just explicit meanings. It really helps you regulate your responses. Just naturally, negotiations can be emotionally charged, and especially if you are dealing with sensitive, high stake issues or difficult people, which for some reason, animal welfare traditionally is all three. um, Letting your emotions get the best of you can impair your judgment, communication, and relationship with the other party. You need to manage effectively and constructively. You can do this by being aware of your triggers, coping strategies, and emotional states. Work as hard on yourself as you will on that contract negotiation, and it will pay dividends. Find a safe, and I'm going to just pause to highlight that this is what I have found to be critically important for me and my styles. Find a safe and confidential sounding board to express your frustrations to, because there will be some. And then you can remain calm and professional during the discussions with the other negotiating party. And I've mentioned this before, but to the extent that you can, take your time. The most successful negotiations I've been a part of have taken 8 to 12 months. You may not always have the benefit of time, but if you do, take that time to mindfully approach the entire process. Focus on the other side's pressures, not yours. We all have a tendency to focus on our own pressure, on the reasons why we need to make this work. But when you focus on your own limitations, you miss the big picture. Instead, successful negotiators ask, what is the pressure on the other side? You will feel more powerful when you recognize the reason for the other side to give in. Your negotiation power derives in part from the pressures on the other person. Even if they appear nonchalant, they inevitably have worries and concerns and pressures outside that are coming from outside on their side. If you discover that they are under pressure, which they surely are, in a compassionate way, look for ways to exploit that in order to achieve a better result for yourself. And remember that ultimately you do want the same thing. They wouldn't be outsourcing the services if they had the means and desire to do it themselves. In how you get there, or the conflict becomes how you get there, or more specifically, for how much you get there. And compensation is usually always what's at the bottom of the issue. And above all else, be sure to show the other person how their needs will be met. Successful negotiators always look at the situation from the other side's perspective. Everyone looks at the world differently. So you are way ahead of the game if you can figure out their perception of the deal. Instead of trying to win the negotiation, seek to understand the other negotiator and show them the way to feel satisfied. If you help the other side feel satisfied, they will be more inclined to help satisfy your needs. This doesn't mean to give in to all of their positions, but satisfaction means that their basic interests have been fulfilled, not necessarily that all of their demands have been met. My pro tip, practice negotiation in real life. No joke. The hardest negotiations I have ever been in is literally with my 4-year-old. This is a true story. One time we were negotiating for a treat for eating her dinner. Eating her dinner is a real issue in our house, so don't judge. and my starting offer was 3 chocolate candies. She came back and said she wanted 10 chocolate candies. And I said no, she could not have 10. We went back and forth, and the final agreement was for 3 chocolate candies and a mini cookie. After all was said and done, I was like so relieved. I'm like, okay, great. She's actually going to eat her dinner. She looks at me and says, I changed my mind. I don't want any of it, and walked away. It was the wildest experience, but it actually taught me a lot. Another place that you can get some real life experience with negotiating, and I'm like fully serious, go to flea markets or antique sales, and just try and barter with those folks to get the best deal you can for whatever product they're selling. You will really quickly learn about different negotiation styles that folks have, and what you can be most successful with. Um, and it'll go a long way in your professional life for negotiating. Okay, real world examples. So, animal welfare organizations are starting to get really serious about their worth and who actually needs who. And I want to really stress, do not be afraid of your hard negotiations going public. Sometimes it's exactly what's needed for the appropriate pressure to be felt on city staff and decision makers. Um, Weaponizing compassion and fear mongering are probably the most common tactics I see from the other side of the table, especially when negotiation discussions go public. Weaponizing compassion is a tactic to shame and guilt and pressure animal welfare organizations. And at times, they will use our mission and generosity against us. Or you may see city officials claiming that proper animal services funding means less police officers or firefighters to serve the community. Or even worse, there are at times dismissive attitudes about how we can just fundraise what we need. Do not let your organization be shamed into instability and financial unsustainability. Um, Little side note, I actually live in Idaho despite working full time for San Diego Humane. And so here in my backyard, West Valley Humane is currently fighting the good fight. I don't know how it will turn out for them. I'm not assisting them with this, but it really makes me proud to see the effort that they're putting in to ensuring that they have sustainability over the long term. Closer to home, like figuratively, not literally, San Diego Humane was recently faced with a 20% reduction to our compensation for the coming fiscal year. And this meant approximately $4 million in reduction to what was already agreed to contractually. It was totally unexpected. And, we went from thinking, we were just sending information over about the future year's compensation and moving right along to a situation of, for months, fighting for compensation that was, they were contractually obligated to pay us. It really took months. It took months of meetings. It took behind the scenes meetings, public meetings, presentations in public, and media coverage, which some was good and some was really uncomfortable. We did ultimately end up short of the compensation owed to us by 1.5 million, far better than the four, a little over four, that we were looking at the beginning of this calendar year. And so, like, was it an ideal outcome? No. But is it better than we expected, considering the city has a $258 million projected deficit? 100% yes. There were many folks that were on our side that truly didn't expect to be able to close that gap at all. Um, we're now working with the city on proposed service level cuts and negotiating to be made financially whole, uh, not FY26, but FY27, and moving forward. And we will insist on some sort of back pay, essentially, for the cut that was unanticipated for this year, in a way that's fair and makes sense. I'm not gonna lie, it was hard and it was emotional, but it was super worth fighting for. I want to just really encourage every organization to remember your worth always. The work we do is extraordinary, and we're at a kind of precipitous time in animal welfare where the expectations for our services are higher than they've ever been, and resources are so thin. So this may sound a little bit hyperbolic, but I truly believe that we have a duty to ourselves and each other that is as deep as our duty to the animals to insist on fairness in contract terms and especially fairness in compensation. Okay. We have come to the end where we get to open it up for questions if there are any. I have also put my email address up on the screen should you wish to reach out separately. I'll just note that I am so passionate about helping animal welfare organizations and government departments who are fighting for their piece of the financial pie work their way into more favorable positions. Um, with that, I think we've got about 19 minutes, which may be too much, maybe not enough, who knows? I'm happy to answer any of your questions. Don't don't come all at me at once now.
Oh, they want to see the email address again.
Oh, let me put it in the chat. That's probably more helpful because yes, I did get that slide out of there. Oops. I decided to do this webinar from somebody else's computer that I've never been on before, so forgive me if I'm kind of looking all over the place to try and get you an email address.
Well, it looks like you have a fellow Idahoanite.
I think Idahoan's pretty good. The alternative is Idahoan, which I hear frequently.
Idahoan, okay.
Andy, what part of Idaho? All right. What is your advice for handling the conversation when the government entity continually cites their own budget shortfall? So this is completely normal, the cities and other agencies citing their own budget shortfalls, and it's kind of exactly what we ended up dealing with this year at San Diego Humane. um, the way that I really try and frame it is that your crisis is not our crisis. There are services you are obligated to pay for, you are contractually agreed to pay for. We certainly uh, are willing to talk always about openly about like how, if there is a path forward to reducing costs, or if there are any temporary reductions that we can take to sort of get the city through their tougher times. But at the end of the day, it's the decision maker's job to make tough decisions. Some of that may not go our way, and that's why we really need to have those relationships developed, have that education done, and also have just like an army of advocates ready to show up on your behalf. But at the end of the day, if animal services costs what it costs. And I think that public pressure in particular for our organizations to do a good job and what their expectations are actually helps with that pressure on the elected officials not to automatically go for animal welfare organizations as kind of low hanging fruit. When the city of San Diego did kind of propose to us that we're going to have a 20% cut, they calculated that to be $3.5 million. But they had some errors in like their baseline, and they had forgotten to include the natural increase that we are owed based on a living wage ordinance where they require us to increase our compensation to our staff. And so in reality, it was more than the 3.5 million, like the delta. And when the independent budget analyst, independent of the mayor's office, independent of city council, went and reviewed everything, he did come back with a recommendation. And what I just like take such delight in is that the city ended up having to pay more than their initial proposed cut overall to Parks Department to fund our contract. And even though we're not seeing the whole thing, because of their like funny budgeting and forgetting to include the living wage increases over the past few years on their side, it cost them $4.2 million that they had to put back into the budget. Which I think at the end of the day, like as complicated as all that was, it was a huge like lesson and message to them that we are not low hanging fruit and we will fight as hard as we need to for what we deserve. Boise at Idaho Humane Society. Awesome. All right. Let's see. Oh, thank you so much, Carrie. I love to see that that some of what we were doing publicly was helpful. Catherine says we run a municipal shelter that the county offers for bid, but we can only bid with the variable fields they provide instead of a fixed price. How would you suggest we approach that? Um, it depends. I mean, I guess I get the sense that you're probably a nonprofit. I would just sit down with city manager and department staff. So even though you respond to an RFP or a bid, I think it's totally worth having a conversation with them very, frankly about how much benefit there is to fixed price instead of negotiable price. Because, there are years certainly where we lose a little bit on our fixed price, and there are years where it covers a little bit more costs associated with the service we're providing. But the certainty has actually been the biggest thing that our municipalities have been grateful for, because their previous contractor, they did have variable, and it was kind of a nightmare at year end when they had to make everybody's budgets match. Okay, let's see. Advice for private shelters who contracted city says since the city is mandated to pick up at-large cats by state law, the shelter is then mandated to take in cats, even though it was specifically called out in our contract that we will not take in free roaming cats. I would say you got to put a dollar amount to that. That is a tough one, but I think that there's probably some very serious conversations that need to be had with the city, educating first and foremost, like taking the money side out of it, the benefits of community cat programs, both for the healthy ecosystem and cat population reduction over time. But that's significant to do those intakes, and regardless of what the outcome is, whether they're live outcomes or euthanasia outcomes, there is still a cost associated with that the city ought to bear if they're not allowing you to operate under your contract the way you've agreed to. Stephanie says our contract is administered by the city department that runs the DMV. Going back to dog licensing, they have no contractual relationship with the police department, but their scope overlaps with them more. Any advice on bridging the disconnect? Yeah, we have some contracts that are in some weird places too. Our largest contract is in actually the Parks and Recreation Department. And I'm sure that there will be some sympathy when I say off-leash dog issues in public parks are like my nightmare, especially when trying to balance just the awful situation of cities asking for more enforcement, but don't write tickets, but make sure the activity stops. And because we are under the Parks Department, there's like an intense pressure on that activity in particular, even though it is a tiny portion of what we do for animal care and control. I would say that if you need to start developing those relationships and bridging that gap, I mean, it really does make sense to just have meetings with the other city departments that you mostly overlap with. See if you can identify like a specific person within that department that you can liaise with, or have another staff member, develop a close relationship with. And it really can be as simple as, we know that the work we do overlaps. So we really want to make sure that we're in communication. And I think over time, if your preference is that oversight is moved into the department that it makes more sense or that you have more overlap with, those that relationship development on the front end, I think can kind of help drive that change. Um, I would also, utilize the board or council members or whomever. It makes sense to sometimes, if you need to, just work your way around the staff, not in a way that will damage relationships, but go straight to them and say, hey, decision maker, this is a weird thing. We're under this department, and it would make way more sense if we're under this department. I think the biggest thing is that the recipient department needs to be willing to have you and want you. So that would kind of be the biggest hurdle, I think. Will I be sending reading materials to emails? We can email out the recommendations, definitely. So there was a book, some articles, and some podcasts, all definitely worth your time.
Yeah, Juliana, if you want to get those to me, I can grab the contact list and I'll send everything out after.
Perfect. Yes. And you can like PDF the slides and send that too if that's helpful for folks. Jason oversees a municipal shelter and animal services agency that contracts with county animal control who do not have their own shelter. The current contract just requires that they charge per animal through its stray hold, which, yes, it does make up a very minimal amount. Additional costs. Yes, I think that there's probably quite a bit that you could start working into your agreement with the county. And this is not unusual for there to be like municipal to municipal contracts, not just municipal to nonprofit contracts. And I think that, unfortunately, these ones have the propensity to get more out of whack than the nonprofit to municipal. I have some ideas that I can share with you offline. So just reach out to me and maybe we can talk a little bit more specifics about, what the agreement currently looks like and what you might be able to suggest moving forward. Okay.
Awesome questions.
Yeah, really good. And, as I mentioned, I'm totally willing. I'll put my email in there one more time. Just it might be lost up at the top. So folks can contact me if you so choose. Oh. Too many email addresses. I was about to combine two. That wouldn't have worked. Okay, there you are. I love this topic. I am so passionate about making sure that as an industry, we are moving in the direction of like fairness in terms, fairness in compensation. So I'm always willing to help out. It's, what do they say? Oh God, now I can't think of the saying, but something about, one boat lifts all ships or whatever. If we're all sort of in this a little bit more together, it just makes it so much easier for the ones that come sort of behind us in the fight for, fairness for their organizations.
Juliana, it's always such a pleasure to listen to you present. You always have so many amazing things. Just, general awesomeness about, taking the time to know yourself and be confident. Something about rising tide raises all ships.
That's it. Thank you.
Good job.
That's the one.
And everyone, I also put into the chat the link if you are not NACA members. It is $25 a year. Sorry, and you can get access to more amazing content like this, as well as training discounts. If you have any other information about that, please let me know. Is there anything else that anybody would like to contribute to today's leading conversation? Y'all have been an amazing group. Thank you so much.
Totally. And I look forward to hearing from any of you. I'm happy to assist if I can.
Yeah. Awesome. Well, everyone stay safe. And as always, thank you for everything that you do out there.
Yay. Thank you so much.
Awesome. Juliana, always amazing. Safe travels. Bye, everybody.
Bye.